They moved my bed out while I was at the yard. Didn't ask, didn't call. My daughter-in-law had a crew in there by 10 in the morning. By the time I got home, my whole room was white and grey, and it smelled like paint. A folding cot sat in the guest room down the hall, a note taped to the door, and the note said this was temporary. I own that house. My name is on the deed. My name was on the mortgage note too, paid off 9 years back. And still, a 36-year-old woman, married into this family, thought she could hand me a cot and a sticky note. Like I was a tenant behind on rent. I didn't yell. I never do. I set my toolbox down in the hall, looked at that cot, and thought about the level I keep in my truck. It tells you the truth whether you want to hear it or not. Priscilla wanted this house to photograph clean. She didn't know the note on it hadn't answered to anyone who redecorated it. Not for 3 years. She was about to find that out the hard way, standing in a room she thought she owned. But before the cot, there was a woman named Loretta, and a house built one course of brick at a time. My name is Gerald Corbett. I am 72 years old. I laid brick for other men's houses for 18 years, before I ever laid one for my own. I did not raise my voice at Priscilla that day. I did not need to. I just went and found my level. I came home from the yard to find my own bed gone, a folding cot in the guest room, and a note taped to the door that said this was only temporary. I stood in that hallway a good long minute. The house smelled like fresh paint, maybe from the new baseboards some crew had tacked up while I was gone. I walked into what used to be my bedroom, Loretta's and mine, stripped down near to the studs. Bed gone, dresser gone. Her reading chair by the window, gone too. That chair had a worn spot on the left arm, right where she'd rest her elbow doing the crossword. White paint on the walls now. There used to be a soft blue, the one she picked out in 1987. Grey curtains where there used to be lace. I've built things with my hands for 46 years. I know when work's been rushed, and I know when it's been done with care. This had been rushed, done by people who didn't care whose bedroom it used to be. I checked the level anyway. Old habit. There's a 4-foot level in my truck. I don't need it for jobs anymore, but I still touch it most days the way some men touch a rosary. I ran my thumb along the new baseboard. It wasn't level. Whoever Priscilla hired did that job fast and sloppy. That's how people build when they're trying to impress somebody instead of trying to make something that lasts. I want you to understand something about me first. A man my age telling this story. People picture some poor, confused old fellow getting pushed around his own house. That's not me. I built Corbett Masonry and Sons from nothing but a hod, a trowel, and a stubborn streak. 46 years ago, I was laying brick for other men. Houses I'd never live in, foundations I'd never sleep over. And I saved every dollar I could. I bought 2 acres on Furnace Street in Larkspur Hollow, put up a pole barn, and called it a company, even though for 3 years it was just me and a used truck. Larkspur Hollow's a small town, brick and quarry country, southwestern Pennsylvania, 20 minutes off Route 40, outside Uniontown. My father worked the quarry there, and his father before him. I didn't want to break rock for another man my whole life, so I learned to lay it instead, and I got good enough that men started asking for me by name. Not by the company that sent me. I met Loretta at a church picnic in 1974. She was serving pie off a folding table. I told her the table wasn't level. She looked at me like I was the strangest man she'd ever met. Then she laughed, this big, honest laugh, and said, "Well, fix it then." So I did. Got down on the ground right there in my church clothes and shimmed that table leg with a flat rock from the creek. She watched me do it, and that was that. We married the next spring. She kept my books for 30 years. Every job Corbett Masonry ever bid, every dollar in and out, she wrote it down by hand, because computers lost things, and paper didn't. She was right about a lot of things. She was right about people, more than I ever was. The house on Sycamore Ridge Road, the one they just tore my bedroom out of, I built that myself. Not the company. Me. 3 summers, laying stone and brick after my regular jobs were done. Some nights I worked by truck headlights until Loretta made me stop. I laid the fireplace the summer our son Dean was born. I remember stepping back from it, mortar dust up to my elbows, thinking, there, that'll outlast me. That'll outlast all of us. That fireplace still stands. So does the house. $460,000, the county says it's worth today. Nobody who's really lived in a house cares much what the county thinks. But what matters is, I built every wall myself. For a woman who deserved a house built that way. I intend for it to still be standing long after I'm not. Dean is my son, only child Loretta and I had. I loved him the way you love the one thing you built that can talk back to you. I handed him the daily running of Corbett Masonry 4 years ago. The bidding, the crews, the invoicing. I kept the land, the equipment, and a desk in the back office I still visit most mornings, out of habit more than need. I kept the deed to the house too, kept the mortgage note, though it was paid off 9 years back. Some things you keep in your own name even after they're settled, so nobody gets confused later about whose name belongs there. 8 years ago, Dean married a woman named Priscilla. She runs a home staging and interior design business out of Redcliffe, the county seat 11 miles from us, where the bank sits and the law office is too. I never disliked Priscilla. I thought she was sharp, ambitious, and I like ambitious people. I built a company from nothing myself. What I didn't know for years was how much debt she'd stacked behind that business, or how she'd started looking at my house the way she looked at other people's houses before staging them for a sale, like inventory, something to be arranged, photographed, moved along. She expanded that business 2 years ago, took a loan against her own name, $61,000, opened a bigger showroom, hired 2 assistants. I found this out much later. In pieces. That's how you find out most true things about people. Not all at once, but a little at a time, until the whole shape sits in front of you, and you wonder how you missed it. What I knew, that spring it all started, was only this. Priscilla lost 2 of her biggest retainer clients that spring, some falling out over a project in Redcliffe. Her business fell $9,000 behind on that loan. She never said a word about it at family dinner. She never says a word about anything that makes her look like she isn't winning. What she did say at family dinner was that the house on Sycamore Ridge would show like a dream. If it weren't, and I'm quoting her here, stuffed with an old man's junk. She said it smiling. She said it the way people say things they think are jokes, but mean every word of. Dean laughed. Dean spent 8 years learning to laugh at whatever Priscilla says, funny or not. I didn't laugh. I didn't say anything either. I just kept eating my dinner and thought about the level in my truck. I should tell you about my own hidden card here. 3 years ago, I had a health scare. Nothing I'll go into detail about. Just enough of a scare that people around me started talking about simplifying things. Meaning simplifying me right out of my own decisions. I heard that talk before I ever felt sick enough to deserve it. So I thought, if everybody else is planning my life for me, I'd better plan it first and better than they can. I went to Foster Hugby. He's held my accounts at the bank in Redcliffe for 19 years. A man who still remembers the day I walked in with a coffee can full of cash to open my first account for Corbett Masonry. With him and with a lawyer, I re-recorded the mortgage on the Sycamore Ridge house into a trust. My granddaughter Wren, Dean's girl, is the sole beneficiary. 12 years old, sharper than half the grown men I've hired. The bank itself sits as trustee on the note. I moved the masonry company's land and equipment too, the whole 2 acres on Furnace Street, into a separate holding company that answers to me and me alone. Nobody in my family knows this. Not Dean, not Priscilla, not even Wren. Not yet, though she'll know soon enough. And she'll understand it better than either of her parents ever will. The note on that house hadn't answered to whoever redecorated it. Not for 3 years. Priscilla didn't know that when she had my bed carried out to the curb, like an old mattress nobody wanted. She thought she was staging a house that was going to be hers to show, hers to sell, hers to photograph for her portfolio, when the loan people came calling. She had no idea the ground under her nice white paint was already spoken for. I want to be plain about something else. This isn't a story about hating a woman who married my son. I don't hate Priscilla. I feel sorry for her. If I feel anything past the calm I try to hold on to most days. She's scared. Scared people do foolish things, and foolish people who are scared too do cruel ones. She'd become both without ever quite noticing the turn. Dean is not a villain here. I want that understood early. It matters for where this ends, because my son is weak right now. He's letting his wife's fear run the whole household. He doesn't know how to stand up to her. Without it turning into a fight, he doesn't think he can win. That's not evil. That's a young man who married into someone else's storm. He hasn't learned yet how to build his own shelter. And there's a difference. I intend to remember it, even when it would be easier not to. But that morning standing in the hallway, looking at a folding cot where my bed used to be, I wasn't thinking about redemption or second chances. I was thinking about Loretta. What she'd say, seeing this room stripped of her chair, painted over in a colour she never would have chosen. She died 6 years ago. Cancer. Slow, then fast. The way it goes sometimes. I won't dwell on it. She wouldn't want me to. What I will tell you is this. In her last steady week, before things got hard, she sat me down at our kitchen table. The one I built with my own hands out of a black walnut tree that came down in a storm. And she told me something. I've carried it every day since. Don't let this house go to whoever measures the windows first, Gerald, she said. Let it go to whoever's still standing in it when the dust settles. I didn't fully understand her then. I understand her a great deal better now. Standing in a stripped bedroom, a sticky note on the door calling my own displacement temporary. I walked down the hall to the guest room. I sat on that folding cot. It creaked under me, the way cheap things always creak. Things built in a hurry always tell on themselves, eventually. I thought about Ray Talbot, my foreman at the yard, 22 years working for me. He'd called that very morning before I even got home to tell me he'd seen a moving truck out front on his way to a job. I hadn't believed him. I do now. I thought about Foster Higby's number. I still know it by heart, though I haven't needed it for anything urgent in 3 years. I thought about the ledger Loretta kept, tucked somewhere in this house, a place nobody but me would think to look, and I thought calmly, the way I think about most things, that Priscilla had just made a mistake, a great deal bigger than she understood. I want to be honest, I wasn't angry, not the way people usually mean it. I was something quieter, colder. I was a man who'd just watched somebody put a folding cot in the room where he was supposed to grieve his wife in peace, and who decided, sitting on that cheap little cot, he was done being patient about being patient. I don't raise my voice, I check the level. That morning, the level told me plenty. The next thing I did surprised even me, for how calm it was, and I got up off that cot, walked back into what used to be my bedroom, looked at the new paint job with a professional's eye instead of a grieving man's. 2 coats maybe, cheap primer, the kind that never quite covers a dark colour underneath. Sure enough, near the baseboard, you could see a shadow of the old blue trying to bleed through. Loretta's blue, fighting its way back even under 2 coats of somebody else's hurry. I ran my hand along that wall a minute, didn't say anything, not even to myself, then went out to my truck, got my level, and brought it back inside, set it on the kitchen counter, where I'd see it first thing every morning until this was finished. Some men keep a Bible on the counter. I keep a level. Different books, same idea. Tells you what's true, whether you like it or not. Priscilla came home around 6 that evening, 2 shopping bags full of throw pillows, the colour of oatmeal, and a real estate photographer's business card clipped to her purse strap. She saw me sitting in the kitchen, level on the counter in front of me. She smiled the way she always smiles when she thinks she's already won something. You found the guest room okay, she said. Not a question, just a little pat on the head, dressed up as a sentence. I found it, I said. It's not level either. Northeast corner drops about a 1/4 inch. She blinks at me. Like I'd spoken a foreign language, which, in a way, I had. Priscilla doesn't speak the language of things built to hold weight. She speaks the language of things that photograph well. 2 very different tongues, and most of what was about to happen in my house would be a translation problem between them. One that was going to end with her finding out, the hard way, which one actually paid the bills. It's just for a little while, Gerald, she said. Until we get some better photos of the place. My business has been slow. A listing like this, if we ever needed to sell, would really help my portfolio. If we ever needed to sell it. I noted that phrase the way I'd note a hairline crack in a foundation. Small, worth watching. Not yet worth panicking over. But the kind of thing that tells you, eventually, this wall is going to need more than paint. I didn't argue. I didn't tell her about the trust, or Foster Higby, or the ledger I hadn't even found yet myself. I just nodded, the way you nod at a weather report you already know is wrong. I let her go on believing, for a little while longer, that this house was hers to stage. The next morning, I drove into Redcliffe before the yard even opened. 11 miles of 2-lane road, past the quarry, past the old feed store that closed when I was still in my 30s. Foster Higby's bank sits on Court Street, brick front, the kind of building that still looks like it means what it says. I've walked in there for 19 years. Foster's office is in the back. Past the tellers, a desk with a green lamp and a photo of his grandkids. He stood up when I came in, the way he always does. and shook my hand like we hadn't just talked on the phone 3 weeks back. "Gerald," he said, "you look like a man with a question." "I've got one," I said. "The trust on Sycamore Ridge. Is it still clean?" He didn't ask why. Foster's the kind of banker who knows a man doesn't drive 11 miles before breakfast for small talk. He pulled the file, the real one. Not a digital copy, because Foster keeps paper on anything that matters, same as Loretta did. He ran his finger down the page and nodded. "Clean as the day we recorded it," he said. "Nobody's touched it. Nobody's filed against it. That house and that mortgage answer to the trust, and the trust answers to Wren, with this bank as trustee. Nothing signed at your kitchen table changes a word of that." Something loosened in my chest I hadn't noticed was tight. 3 years of planning, and it had held. I asked him one more thing, quieter. "What about the company land? Furnace Street?" "Same," Foster said. "Same holding entity. Same as you set it up. Put a for sale sign in your own front yard tomorrow, Gerald, and none of it would move an inch. Not unless you signed for it yourself." I thanked him. Told him I might be back sooner than usual. He said the door was always open, and if I ever needed him to say any of this out loud in front of anyone, he'd be glad to. Bankers don't usually offer that. Foster's not usual, and I've never forgotten why I picked him 19 years ago over the bigger bank in town. Driving back to Larkspur Hollow, I thought about Loretta again, the way I do most mornings on that road. But this time I thought about something specific. The ledger. She'd kept one for 30 years. Every job we ever bid. Every dollar that moved through this family, written in her own hand. In a series of black books she kept in a recipe box on the kitchen counter. After she died, I'd moved that box into the hall closet, because I couldn't look at it every day without my throat closing up. I hadn't opened it since. I decided that morning I was going to open it. But first, the yard. Ray Talbot was waiting. When I pulled in, arms crossed, standing by the mixer like he'd been standing there since sunrise, watching the road for my truck. "You saw the truck," he said. Not a question. "I saw the room," I said. "Bed's gone." "My bed, Ray." "Cot in the guest room." Ray's face did something I hadn't seen it do in 22 years of working next to him. He looked like a man watching a wall crack he'd trusted his whole life to hold. "That's not right, Gerald," he said. "That house is yours. Everybody in this county knows that house is yours." "I know it too," I said. Questions whether Priscilla knows it, or whether she's decided it doesn't matter, so long as she gets her photographs. Ray shook his head slowly. He'd worked for me since he was 23, back when I mixed my own mortar by hand on Saturdays. He'd watched Dean grow up underfoot at this yard, a toy dump truck in the dirt. His mother bringing us both sandwiches at noon on the tailgate of my old truck. Ray loved this family the way you love people you've worked next to your whole life, and it hurt him plainly to see any part of it come apart. "You need me to say something to Dean?" he asked. "No," I said. "Dean needs to figure out what he thinks on his own. Send you to say it for me, and it won't count for anything when he finally does." Ray didn't like that answer. He respected it anyway, the way he respects most decisions I make, even when he'd have made them different. We worked through the morning on a retaining wall job 3 streets over, and I let my hands do what they know how to do, stacking stone, checking for level, tapping each piece until it settled true against the ones beneath it. There's a piece in that work talking never gives you. Every stone finds its place, or it doesn't belong in the wall, and either way you find out fast. That evening I went home and opened Loretta's recipe box. It sat on the top shelf of the hall closet. Dusty, a faded floral tin that used to hold her recipe cards, pot roast, Christmas cookies, 100 things she cooked from memory anyway, and never needed the cards for. Underneath those cards, wedged into the lining, I found the ledgers, 6 black composition books, rubber banded together, her handwriting on every page, small and careful, the same hand she used to sign birthday cards for grandchildren she never got to see grow up. I sat down at the kitchen table, the black walnut one I built with my own hands, and I started reading. The early pages were what I expected. Jobs from the 70s and 80s, small amounts, the kind of work that builds a reputation one satisfied customer at a time. A porch for $400, a chimney repair for $600. By the 90s, the numbers had grown the way the company had grown, jobs running into the thousands, then the tens of thousands. Corbett Masonry bidding on commercial work by then, a school addition, a hospital wing, Work that needed real crews, real insurance, real bonding paperwork Loretta handled herself at that same kitchen table. But the last book, the one covering her last 5 years, stopped me cold. Loretta had kept notes in the margins that weren't about our jobs at all. Little observations, dated in her small, careful hand. P asked D about the house again today. 3rd time this month. P. This business seems to be struggling more than she lets on. D covered a bill for her without telling G. Reminded D that this house isn't his to promise to anyone. She'd seen this coming. Years before I ever suspected a thing, my wife had been watching Priscilla circle this house the way you watch weather building on the horizon. She'd written it all down, quietly. The way she wrote down everything that mattered, so that someday, if it ever came to this, there'd be a record nobody could argue with. I sat there a long time with that book open in front of me. The house was quiet. Dean and Priscilla lived 20 minutes away in their own place, so it was just me, the kitchen table, and the refrigerator humming the way it's hummed for 15 years, without me ever once thinking to fix the sound. I found one more thing that night folded into the back cover. A single sheet of paper, in Loretta's hand, dated 2 years before she died. Not numbers this time. A letter addressed to me that she'd written and decided not to give me. Not while she was alive to watch my face read it. I didn't read it that night. I want to be honest about that. I looked at my own name in her handwriting, and I put it back exactly where I found it. Some things a man has to be ready for before he opens them, and I wasn't ready that night. I told myself I'd read it when the time was right, and sitting there, I had a feeling that time was coming faster than I wanted it to. The next 2 weeks, Priscilla kept up her staging. She brought in a photographer, a young man named Cole Ferris, who did real estate work all over the county, and he spent a whole Saturday photographing my house room by room, while I was conveniently out running errands Priscilla had suggested, in a tone that wasn't really a suggestion at all. When I got home, the guest room had a new comforter, on the cot, folded hospital corners, the kind you'd use to stage a room for someone you expected to be checking out soon, not moving into for good. I noticed things. A man who spent his life reading structures for what's true underneath the surface notices things other people never catch. Priscilla's phone rang more than usual, and she'd step into the hallway to take those calls, lowering her voice each time. A new folder showed up on the kitchen counter one evening. Official looking, bank letterhead across the top. She scooped it up fast when she saw me looking her way. Dean got quieter at dinner. The way a man gets quiet when he's carrying something heavy he doesn't know how to put down in front of his own father. I said nothing about any of it. I checked my level. I went to work. I let the days pass the way you let concrete cure. Not rushing it. Not disturbing it before it's ready to hold real weight. 3 weeks after the bedroom, Priscilla sat me down in the kitchen on a Sunday afternoon. Coffee poured for both of us the way she does when she wants something, and has decided friendly will get her there fastest. "Gerald," she said, "Dean and I have been talking. About the future. About what's best for everyone." "Go on," I said. "You're 72, she said. "This house is a lot for one person. The yard alone. The stairs. We think, and I want you to hear this as coming from love, we think it might be time to talk about downsizing. Getting you somewhere easier. Somewhere safer." I looked at her over my coffee. I thought about the folder with the bank letterhead. I thought about Loretta's margin notes, dated years before this conversation, predicting this exact sentence, almost word for word, down to the tone. "Somewhere safer," I repeated. "There's a lovely community outside Redcliffe," she said. "Single level, no stairs. They handle the yard work, the maintenance, all of it. You'd have your independence, but people checking in on you every day." "And this house?" I asked. "Well," she said, and here it came. The sentence she'd been building toward for 3 weeks of staged photographs and hospital-cornered comforters. We'd list it, of course. A house like this, in this condition, it would show beautifully. We could get top dollar for it. That money could set you up wonderfully wherever you landed next. I set my coffee down. I didn't raise my voice. "That's an interesting plan," I said. "Whose name did you say was on the deed again?" Priscilla's smile flickered, just slightly, the way a weld flickers right before it fails, that half second where you can see the whole thing's about to give if you push it one more degree. "Well, Dean's eventually," she said. "It's a family house, Gerald. We just think, at your age, with everything going on, It might be time to let the next generation take the wheel a little. At your age, with everything going on. I filed those phrases too, next to confused, next to simplify. Every word people use when they've decided an old man's competence is up for a public vote he never agreed to hold in the first place. I'll think about it. I said, that was a lie. The first outright lie I'd told in this whole business. A small one. A useful one. I needed Priscilla to keep believing she had time. I needed her talking. Planning. Leaving a trail, the way water leaves a trail through a crack in a foundation. Long before the whole wall finally falls in. That night I went back to the recipe box. I sat at the black walnut table again, and this time I opened Loretta's letter. Gerald, if you're reading this, I've probably been gone a while, and you've probably let this house get quieter than it should be. That's how she opened it. I could hear her voice reading it to me, plain as if she stood behind my chair. She wrote about the day we married, the folding table at the church picnic, how she knew inside a week I was the kind of man who'd rather fix a wobbling table than talk about the weather. She wrote about Dean, how proud she was of the man he'd grown into, and how scared she was, even then, 2 years before she died, that he'd let someone else do his thinking for him. Then she wrote about Priscilla. She never trusted her. Not fully. She said it plain, no dressing it up. Not because Priscilla was cruel, Loretta wrote, but because Priscilla was frightened. Frightened people mistake other people's things for solutions to their own fear. She'd watched Priscilla eye this house more than once, the way you'd eye a good used truck you couldn't quite afford yet. Patient, calculating, waiting for the right moment. And then she wrote the line that mattered most. I already talked to Foster about the trust, Gerald. It's done, or it will be by the time you read this if you haven't done it yourself yet. Wren gets the house. The bank holds the note. Nobody who married into this family gets to sell what they never built. I know you'll want to be fair to Dean, and you should be. He's our son and he deserves a father's patience. But fair to Dean does not mean handing his wife the keys to a house I watched you build with your own hands, one summer at a time, while I brought you lemonade and told you which stones looked wrong. Don't let this house go to whoever measures the windows first, Gerald. Let it go to whoever's still standing in it when the dust settles. I sat there with that letter a long time. She'd written it 2 years before she died, which meant she'd known, or at least suspected, long before either of us said a word to each other, exactly what kind of trouble was coming down the road. She'd pushed me toward the trust before I ever thought I needed one. I'd credited my own health scare with the idea. Reading her words now, the truth was simpler and harder to swallow. My wife had seen this whole thing coming, years in advance. She'd quietly made sure I built the wall before the storm arrived, without ever telling me she was doing it, because she knew I needed to believe it was my own idea, or I'd never have moved fast enough. That's the kind of woman I married. That's the kind of woman they wanted to erase from a bedroom with 2 coats of grey paint. I folded the letter along its worn crease, put it in my shirt pocket, close to my chest. I sat at that table a good while longer, not crying, not exactly, just letting something settle in me the way concrete settles when you stop working it and let it find its own level. The next morning I went to work like any other day, checked in on 3 job sites, signed off on a materials order, ate lunch out of a paper sack, sitting on a stack of pallets with Ray, same as I had for 22 years. Ray asked if I'd found anything useful going through Loretta's things. I told him I had, and left it there. Some things aren't ready to be spoken out loud yet, even to a man you trust the way I trust Ray Talbot. That was the week the second secret surfaced. It didn't come from Loretta's ledger. It came from Wren. My granddaughter is 12 years old. She is, without question, the sharpest person currently living in this county, myself included on my best day. She came by the yard on a Saturday, riding her bike the 2 miles from her house to mine, because Dean and Priscilla let her have that freedom. One of the few things Priscilla's ever gotten right in my book. Wren likes watching the crews work. She likes asking questions nobody else bothers asking. That Saturday she sat on an overturned bucket near the mixer, watched me check a wall for level, and after a while she said something that stopped me cold. "Grandpa, is Mum in trouble with money?" I set my level down slow. "Why do you ask that, sweetheart?" "I heard her on the phone," Wren said. "She was talking to somebody about a loan. She said if the bank called it early, she'd lose the showroom." She sounded scared. She doesn't usually sound scared. 12 years old, and she'd already noticed what took me weeks to piece together. from a folder scooped off a counter, a business card clipped to a purse strap. "Did she say how much?" I asked, gently. I didn't want to put my granddaughter in the position of spying on her own mother, even though, in fairness, she'd already done exactly that without any prompting from me. "She said something about 9,000, Ren said. "I don't really know what that means for a business. Is that a lot?" For a business the size of Priscilla's carrying a note that size behind on payments, it was more than a lot. It was the kind of number that keeps a person up at night. The kind of number that makes a scared person start looking at things that don't belong to them, telling themselves it's only borrowing, only temporary. The same word taped to my own bedroom door. "It can be," I told Ren, "but that's grown-up business and it's not yours to carry. You did right telling me, but don't go looking for more of it. Let the grown-ups handle the grown-up parts." She nodded, the way she does when she's decided to trust an answer, even though she clearly wanted a fuller one. 12 years old, and already better at reading a room than half the adults in it. I drove to Redcliffe again that Monday, this time to see a different man, a lawyer named Weldon Trask, who'd handled my estate paperwork alongside Foster Higby for the better part of a decade. Weldon's office sits above the hardware store on Depot Street. 2 rooms and a secretary who's worked for him longer than I've known him. I told Weldon everything: the bedroom, the staging, the downsizing conversation, Loretta's letter. Ren's overheard phone call. Weldon listened the way good lawyers listen, without interrupting, taking small notes on a legal pad in handwriting nearly as careful as Loretta's own. "The trust protects the house completely," he said when I finished. "Nothing Priscilla or Dean can do touches that, short of you voluntarily dissolving it, which I'd advise against in the strongest terms. The holding company protects the business the same way. What concerns me more is the pattern you're describing, the staging, the downsizing talk. If she's desperate enough about this loan, she may attempt something more aggressive. Have you had any doctors examine you recently? Any paperwork signed regarding your health or capacity?" The question landed harder than I expected. "No," I said. "Why? Because that's the next move in cases like this," Weldon said. "When the legal ownership route is closed, and it is closed to her completely, the next lever people pull is competency. A guardianship filing, a capacity evaluation, arranged quietly, without your full understanding of what it's for. I'm not saying that's happening. I'm saying it's the pattern, and you should watch for it." I thought about the folder on the counter with the bank letterhead. I thought about the phone calls in the hallway, Priscilla's voice dropping low. I thought about a woman scared enough to move a man's bed out of his own bedroom without asking. Sitting in Weldon Trask's office, I understood something. Foster's Clean Trust and Holding Company weren't the end of this. They were the floor. Something else was coming. I needed to be ready for it before it arrived, not after. If somebody tried that, I said. The competency angle. What would it take to stop it cold? Weldon set his pen down. A recent, thorough, unimpeachable evaluation of your own, from a physician of your choosing, filed and dated before anyone else's attempt, combined with clear financial records showing decades of sound decision-making. Combined, frankly, with a public record of you conducting your affairs exactly as you have been. Calmly, competently, without a hint of confusion anywhere in the paper trail. "Then let's build that record," I said, "starting this week." Weldon smiled. The small, satisfied smile of a man who likes a client who moves fast once he's decided to move at all. "I was hoping you'd say that, Gerald." I left his office with an appointment for the following Tuesday. A full cognitive and physical evaluation with a doctor in Redcliffe who'd never treated a member of my family. No connection to anyone in Priscilla's circle. Independent, unimpeachable. Dated and filed before Priscilla ever got the chance to arrange one of her own. I drove home that evening with the level sitting on the passenger seat beside me, the way it always rides when I've had it out of the truck for a job. I thought about Loretta's letter in my shirt pocket. Ren's small worried face, asking if her mother was in trouble. I thought, not for the first time, that this house had survived worse storms than the one currently building over it. It had survived a Pennsylvania winter that dropped 2 feet of snow the first year I built it. It had survived Loretta's illness and my own grief, and 6 long years of quiet mornings without her voice in the kitchen. It would survive Priscilla too, one way or another. I intended to make sure it survived on my terms, not hers. That night, at dinner with Dean and Priscilla, a rare invitation I'd almost declined, Priscilla brought up the community outside Redcliffe again. The single-level place with no stairs. The dining hall. The little garden plots they let residents keep. Painting a picture meant to sound appealing, rather than what it actually was. A polite word for putting me somewhere I couldn't watch what happened to my own property. "It really is lovely, Gerald," she said. I looked at their brochure again this week. They have an opening coming up, actually, sooner than I expected. "How much does a place like that run?" I asked, mild as anything, spooning gravy over my potatoes. Priscilla hesitated a half-second too long. I'd have to check the exact number. Somewhere around 4,000 a month, I believe. Though of course the house sale would more than cover that for years. Dean, to his credit, looked uncomfortable at that number leaving his wife's mouth so easily. Like she'd priced out my future the way you'd price a countertop. 4,000 a month, I repeated. "And how's your own business doing these days, Priscilla?" I haven't heard much about it lately. The question landed exactly the way I intended. Priscilla's fork paused over her plate a moment before she recovered, answered too smoothly. That business was steady. Always some ups and downs in her line of work. Nothing to worry about. I let it drop there. I'd planted what I needed to plant. A question that told her I was paying attention, without telling her how much I already knew. Dean glanced between us the whole rest of the meal, sensing something shifting in the room he couldn't name yet. The way you sense a floor joist has gone soft under a rug, before you ever see the crack in the ceiling below it. The doctor's evaluation happened the following Tuesday, right on schedule. 2 hours in a quiet office in Redcliffe. A physician named Dr. Amara Bellinger, who'd never met me before and had no idea who Priscilla was. Memory tests, reflexes, a long talk about my finances, my daily routine, my grasp of my own affairs. She asked me to name the year, the president, count backward from 100 by sevens. I did all of it without hesitation. Though I'll admit there's something strange about proving your own mind still works. Like a man asked to prove his hands still know how to lay brick, after 46 years of doing exactly that. At the end, Dr. Bellinger sat back and told me plainly there was nothing here to worry about. My cognition tested well above average for my age. My judgment was sound. My memory, if anything, sharper than most patients 20 years younger. She'd put it all in a written report, dated that day, filed with my attorney, ready if anyone ever needed it. "Do people ask for these often?" I asked her. "More than you'd think," she said. "Usually it's the patient's own idea, protecting themselves ahead of a family dispute. Smart move, honestly. Most people wait until it's too late and somebody else has already found a doctor of their own, choosing to say what they once said." I thanked her and drove straight to Weldon Trask's office to have the report filed and dated the way he'd told me. Weldon read it over, nodded with satisfaction, and said the floor beneath me was now about as solid as a floor could get. "If Priscilla tries the competency route now," he said, "she's not just fighting your trust and your holding company. She's fighting a dated, independent medical opinion that says you're sharper than most men half your age. That's not a fight she wins. Right. That ends her credibility the moment a judge reads 2 pages. I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks sitting in that office. Not triumph exactly. More like the feeling you get checking a wall you built years back, finding it still plumb, still square, still doing exactly what you built it to do. But the story wasn't finished. I knew it wasn't. 2 days later, Ray Talbot called me at home with something that changed the shape of everything. "Gerald," he said, "you need to come down to the yard. There's a man here asking about the Furnace Street property. Says he's a broker." I drove down faster than I probably should have. Ray was right. A man in a grey suit stood by the office door, a folder under his arm. Introduced himself as a commercial real estate broker, Dennis Whitcomb. Said he'd been contacted by Priscilla Corbett about a potential listing of the property. "There's no listing here," I told him, calm as I could manage. "This property isn't for sale, it's not in anyone's name, but a holding company I control alone." Whitcomb looked genuinely confused, pulled out his phone to check something. "That's strange," he said. "Mrs. Corbett told me the property was jointly owned, available for a quick sale, cash preferred. She mentioned a need to move fast, something about covering a business obligation." There it was. Priscilla hadn't just been circling my house. She'd been trying to sell the company yard right out from under me too, without ever having the right to touch it, based on nothing but hope that nobody would check the paperwork before the ink dried. I thanked Mr. Whitcomb for his honesty, gave him Weldon Trask's card, and told him any future inquiries should go through my attorney directly. He apologised, clearly rattled, and left without another word. I stood in that yard a long moment after his car pulled away, looking at the pole barn I'd put up 46 years ago. At the mixer Ray was standing beside the day he first told me about the moving truck, at 2 acres of ground that had fed my family for 2 generations. Priscilla had reached further than I'd realised. Further than a bedroom. Further than a downsizing conversation over Sunday coffee. She'd reached for the whole foundation of everything I'd built. Quietly, behind my back. The way you only reach for something when you already know you have no right to ask for it out loud. That night I called Foster Higby at home, something I rarely do, told him what happened. He was quiet a moment. "Gerald," he said, "I think it's time we had a family conversation. All of us in a room together, with the paperwork on the table. Not to punish anyone, but because secrets don't fix themselves, and this one's gotten big enough that everybody needs to see it in daylight at the same time." I agreed. Not yet, though. Not until I had every piece in place. I wanted the full shape of Priscilla's desperation laid bare before I sat her down across a table. A half-finished reveal only gives a scared person room to lie her way out of the parts you haven't proven yet. 2 nights after that, Priscilla invited herself and Dean over for what she called a family check-in dinner. Her words, and I let her cook in my own kitchen without a word of protest, mostly because I wanted to watch her up close while she still believed she had the upper hand. She made a pot roast, a decent one, and set the table with a tablecloth I didn't recognise, something she must have brought from her own house. Pale grey with a thin gold stripe. The kind of thing that photographs well and means nothing. Over dinner she brought up the community outside Redcliffe a 3rd time, mentioning she'd called them again that afternoon, and they'd hold the opening another 2 weeks if I gave them a deposit soon. I asked, mild as could be, whether a deposit like that was refundable, and she said of course, though something in her voice told me she hadn't actually checked. "You seem awfully eager to get me settled somewhere new," I said, buttering a roll. "Anything in particular pushing that along?" "I just want you comfortable, Gerald," she said. "Is that so wrong?" "Not wrong at all," I said. "Just curious what the hurry's about. You mentioned an opening. Openings usually come from somebody leaving, somebody dying, or somebody's family finally selling the old house to pay for the new one." Priscilla's hand tightened on her fork. Just slightly, the kind of grip you'd miss if you weren't a man who spends his life watching for hairline stress in things that are supposed to be solid. Dean noticed it too. I saw him notice. He didn't say anything, but his eyes went to his wife's hand and stayed there a beat too long. The way a man's eyes go to a crack in a wall he's been told for months isn't really there. "I just think it makes sense. Financially, for everyone," Priscilla said, recovering. "That's all I meant." "Financially," I repeated, letting the words sit in the room a moment. "For everyone. That's an interesting way to put it." I let the rest of dinner pass in ordinary conversation, weather, Wren's school project, a job Dean's crew had bid on that week. But underneath it, I could feel Priscilla watching me differently now. The way you watch a flaw you've suddenly started to suspect might not hold your weight the way you assumed it would. She hadn't caught me at anything specific, but she'd felt the shift, the same way I'd felt the shift the day I found my bed gone. And I understood driving home that night that the clock on all of this had just sped up considerably, whether either of us said so out loud or not. I went back to Loretta's ledgers that week, reading with new eyes this time, looking specifically for anything connecting Priscilla's business to our family's finances. And there, in the second to last book, I found it. An entry from 3 years earlier, in Loretta's hand. Dean asked to borrow $2,800 for a roof repair on the rental property. Told him yes on the condition he doesn't tell G. It's for anything related to P. His plans. He agreed. I don't like keeping this from Gerald, but the boy needs somewhere he can turn, without a fight starting at the dinner table. Loretta had been quietly protecting Dean from Priscilla's ambitions for years, patching small leaks before they became floods, all while keeping the peace at our table so I never had to carry the weight of it, while I still had a business to run and a wife to care for. It broke something open in me, reading that. Not anger exactly, a grief that came late and hit harder for how long it had waited. I confronted Dean about it the next time I saw him alone, at the yard, away from Priscilla. "Your mother helped you with a roof repair 3 years back," I said. $2,800. Did you ever pay her back? Dean went pale. How do you know about that? She wrote it down, I said. She wrote a lot of things down, son. You should know that about your mother. She saw more than either of us ever gave her credit for. Dean sat down on an overturned bucket, the same one Wren likes to sit on, and put his head in his hands a long moment before he spoke again. Priscilla doesn't know I asked Mom for that money, he said. I told her I'd covered it myself out of savings. I didn't want her thinking I couldn't handle things on my own. Why not tell your own wife the truth? I asked, though I already half knew the answer. Because she gets scared when money's tight, Dean said. And when she's scared, she starts making plans. Big plans. Plans I don't always agree with, but I don't know how to stop her once she's decided something. She's not a bad person, Dad. She just grew up with nothing. She's terrified of going back to nothing. Somewhere along the way, she decided this house was the thing standing between her and that fear. That was the most honest thing my son had said to me in months. Maybe years. I recognized hearing it, the shape of the door Loretta had left open for him in her letter. Fair to Dean does not mean handing his wife the keys to a house I watched you build. My wife had understood, even from the grave, that Dean wasn't the enemy here. He was a scared man, married to a scared woman. Scared people build their own kind of prison out of secrets, one small lie at a time, until neither of them can remember which walls are load-bearing and which ones were only ever there to hide something. Does Priscilla know you're talking to me right now? I asked. No, Dean said. She thinks I'm at the hardware store. Then let's keep it that way a little longer, I said. Because I need you to hear something. I need you to actually hear it. Not just nod along the way you do at dinner. Your mother built a wall around this house years before either of us knew we needed one. That wall's going to hold, no matter what Priscilla tries next. The only question left is whether you're standing inside that wall when it holds, or outside it with her. Dean didn't answer right away. He looked at his hands. The way a man looks at hands that used to work a trowel, before he traded them for a desk and a phone, and a wife who did most of his deciding these days. When he finally spoke, his voice was smaller than I'd heard it in years. I don't know how to fix this, Dad, he said. I don't know how to tell a no. You start with one no, I said. Just one. The rest gets easier after that. Same as laying the first course of any wall. Once you've set the first stone level, every stone after it has something true to sit on. He nodded slowly. I let it sit there, unfinished. A man has to walk toward his own spine at his own pace. Pushing him faster than he can go only knocks him over before he's found his footing. I drove home that evening with more pieces in place than I'd had that morning. A growing sense that the family meeting Foster suggested was coming faster than any of us, including Priscilla, were ready for. I stopped by the house before heading home that night. A work stop I hadn't planned, checking on a small foundation crack I'd noticed the week before near the back porch steps. It wasn't serious. A hairline settling crack, the kind every house gets eventually. But I knelt down anyway and ran my thumb along it in the porch light, the same way I'd run my thumb along that baseboard the day they moved my bed. Some habits you don't lose. Some habits, I was starting to understand, you don't want to lose because they're the only reason a man notices trouble before it spreads. The week after that dinner, I called Foster Higby back, told him I was ready for the family meeting he'd suggested, ready to lay every piece of this on a table where nobody could pretend not to see it. But before I set a date, I wanted one more thing confirmed. For that, I needed to go back to the beginning, back to Priscilla's business itself. The showroom in Redcliffe where she staged other people's houses for a living. The place where all of this had started, whether she knew it or not. I drove there on a Thursday afternoon. Not to confront her, just to look. It sat on Commerce Street, a converted storefront with big windows. Mannequin furniture arranged behind the glass, the way a bakery arranges cakes. Everything staged to look like a life nobody actually lived. Through the window I could see Priscilla at her desk on the phone, gesturing with one hand the way people do when they're trying to talk someone into something over a bad connection. I didn't go in. I stood across the street a few minutes watching, the way I'd watch a job site before deciding where the real problem was hiding. Then I noticed something. A moving truck, a different one this time. Not the one from my own bedroom. Parked around back of her building. 2 men loading furniture out of a side door. Not staging furniture. Real furniture. A couch. A dresser. The kind of things you move out of a place you're closing down, not a place you're expanding. I called Ray that evening and asked him a favour. Ray has a cousin who does deliveries all over the county, knows most of the moving crews by name. 2 days later, Ray called back with an answer I'd half expected. Priscilla's showroom lease was ending. She'd told the landlord she was downsizing to a smaller space, cheaper, closer to home, a temporary measure until business picked back up. The landlord, Ray's cousin said, hadn't sounded convinced that temporary was the right word for what he was watching happen. She was drowning, not slowly, fast, and the house on Sycamore Ridge, in her mind, was the life raft, whether it had ever belonged to her or not. I thought about calling Dean that night, telling him what I'd learned. I decided against it. Dean needed to find his own way to the truth, in his own time, or none of it would hold once the dust settled the way Loretta's letter had asked me to make sure it did. Instead, I called Weldon Trask and set the date. 1 week out, a Sunday dinner at my house. The house I'd built with my own hands. The house that had never once, not for a single day, belonged to anyone but me, and now quietly, my granddaughter's trust. I invited Dean and Priscilla, plain and ordinary, the way you'd invite anyone to Sunday dinner. Nothing in my voice to suggest what was coming. I invited Foster Higby too, telling Priscilla only that an old friend from the bank was joining us. True enough not to be a lie, though it left out the part where that old friend was bringing a folder that would end her plans before dessert was served. The week leading up to that dinner passed slower than any week I can remember since Loretta got sick. I worked the yard same as always, checked walls for level, ate lunch with Ray on overturned buckets, and drove past the quarry my father worked and his father before him. Every evening I sat at the black walnut table with Loretta's ledgers open, reading her handwriting until I could nearly hear her voice reading it back to me out loud. I found more entries those last weeks, small things I'd missed the first time through. Each one added another brick to the wall I was building for that Sunday dinner. One entry noted Priscilla had once asked Loretta, years back, what the house might be worth if it ever sold, phrased as idle curiosity. Loretta had underlined it twice in her own book, a woman who trusted her instincts about danger the way I trust a level. Another entry noted a small argument between Dean and Priscilla that Loretta had overheard through a cracked window about whether Dean's name alone should go on some future deed. Dean had won that argument at the time, Loretta wrote, though it hadn't stopped Priscilla from trying again years later in a different form. Loretta had watched this slow siege building for the better part of a decade before she ever mentioned a word of it to me. Reading it all laid out like that, I understood why. She hadn't wanted to poison the years we had left with suspicion aimed at our own son's wife. She'd chosen instead to quietly build defences, brick by brick, the same way I'd taught her to watch a wall for the first sign of a lean, trusting that if the day ever came when those defences were needed, I would find them and know exactly what to do. Wren came by the yard again that Saturday before the dinner, riding her bike same as always. This time she brought something with her. A folded piece of paper she said she'd found in her mother's home office, in a drawer she wasn't supposed to be looking through, but had looked through anyway, because in her words, something felt off in the house lately. Grandpa and I wanted to know what. It was a printed email, a formal notice from Priscilla's bank about the missed payments on her business loan. It listed a total of $18,000 in arrears across 6 months. And a line near the bottom that made my chest go tight reading it. The bank was scheduling a formal loan review, with a possible acceleration of the full remaining balance if the account wasn't brought current within 30 days. 30 days. Priscilla wasn't circling my house out of simple greed. She was drowning against a deadline. She'd decided somewhere along the way that the fastest route to shore ran straight through a house that had never once belonged to her. Built by hands that weren't hers, for a woman she'd never met and never bothered to honour. Grandpa, Wren said, watching my face as I read it. Is this bad? For Mum. I folded the paper carefully and put it with the rest of what I was gathering. It's not good, I told her honestly, because Wren has never once deserved a life from me. Not even a small useful one. But it's not the end of the world either, sweetheart. Your mother made some choices that put her in a hard spot. She's going to have to find her own way out of it. What matters is, you don't carry her worry as your own. That's not your job. It never was. Are you going to help her? Wren asked. There was something so plainly hopeful in the question. It nearly undid the calm I'd been holding on to for weeks. I'm going to make sure the truth gets said out loud, I told her. What happens after that is up to the people who have to live with it. But I promise you this. Whatever happens Sunday, you and your father are going to be all right. That much I can guarantee. I built the wall around that a long time ago, before either of us knew we'd need it. She hugged me then, quick and fierce, the way children hug you when they understand more than they can say out loud. She rode home on her bike, leaving me standing in the yard with $18,000 of somebody else's desperation folded up in my shirt pocket, right next to Loretta's letter, which I still carried with me most days by then, the way some men carry a rabbit's foot, or a coin from a lucky year. That Saturday night, the night before the dinner, I sat alone at the black walnut table one last time, before everything changed. I read Loretta's letter through again, start to finish, out loud this time, my voice the only sound in that quiet house. When I got to the last line, the one about the dust settling, I said it twice, once for her, once for myself. So I'd carry it into that room the next evening, the way a man carries a level onto a job he already knows. In his bones is going to test every skill he's ever learned. I laid out everything I'd need that night on the kitchen counter, next to the level that had been sitting there for weeks. Foster's confirmation of the trust in writing, Weldon's letter regarding the holding company and the Furnace Street property, Dr. Bellinger's competency evaluation, dated and filed, Loretta's letter in its original envelope, and the printed bank notice Wren had found, $18,000 deep in arrears, 30 days from an acceleration that would end Priscilla's business, the same week it ended her claim to a house that was never hers. 5 pieces of paper. That was all it took, in the end, to answer everything Priscilla had spent 3 months trying to take. 5 pieces of paper and a level, sitting on a kitchen counter, waiting for Sunday. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was nervous, I want to be clear about that, but because a man doesn't sleep easy the night before. He finally sets down a weight he's been carrying quietly for weeks. I lay in that guest room cot, the same one they'd given me as temporary, and I thought about how strange it was that the cot had never once felt like a punishment to me, the way Priscilla probably meant it to. It had felt instead like a workbench, a place to sit and plan and wait, the way I used to sit on an overturned bucket at a job site, working out in my head exactly how a wall was going to come together before I ever laid the first stone. Sunday morning I woke early, made coffee, and walked through the house one last time before anyone arrived, checking every room the way I used to check a finished job before handing the keys to a customer. The kitchen, where Loretta had cooked 10,000 meals for this family. The living room, where Dean took his first steps on a rug, Loretta picked out the same week she found out she was pregnant. The stripped bedroom down the hall, still painted white and grey, still smelling faintly of primer under 2 coats of somebody else's hurry. I stood in that bedroom a long moment, hand flat against the wall, where the old blue still tried to bleed through beneath the paint. And I said, quiet, just to myself, almost there, Loretta. Almost there. Then I went downstairs, gathered my 5 pieces of paper into a single folder, set my level beside my chair at the head of the table, and waited for my family to arrive for Sunday dinner. Before I tell you what happened at that Sunday table, I need to back up a few days. There's a piece of this I haven't told you yet, and it matters more than I understood at the time. 3 days before the dinner, Priscilla called me directly. She almost never does that, preferring to route everything through Dean. Her voice on the phone was tight, controlled. The voice of a woman trying hard to sound like nothing was wrong. Gerald, she said, I wanted to talk to you before Sunday. Just the 2 of us. I'm listening, I said. I know things have felt tense lately, she said. The bedroom, the conversations about the community, none of it comes from a bad place. I care about this family. I care about you, even if it doesn't always come across that way. I let her talk. I've learned, over 46 years of bidding against men who wanted to talk me down on price, that the person doing most of the talking is usually the person most afraid of silence. I've had some difficulties with my business, she went on. This was the closest she'd come to admitting anything before that dinner. Nothing catastrophic, but real difficulties. And I think, if I'm honest, some of my urgency about the house has been tangled up in that. I'm not proud of it. But I wanted you to hear that from me directly, before Sunday, so it doesn't feel like an ambush. It was, I'll admit, the most honest thing she'd said to me in 8 years. For a moment I nearly softened towards her, nearly considered handling the whole thing quieter, a private conversation instead of a table full of witnesses. Then she said one more thing that told me everything I needed to know about how far she was still willing to go. I was hoping, she said, that before Sunday, we might talk about a smaller version of the idea. Not selling the whole house, just a home equity line, using the property as collateral. Enough to get the business current. You'd keep the house, Gerald. I'd never ask you to leave it. I just need the number on paper to satisfy the bank. There it was. Not an apology. A different door into the same room. She wasn't asking me to sell my house. She was asking me to mortgage a house that already carried no mortgage against a business already $18,000 behind to solve a problem she still hadn't told her own husband the true size of. I'll think about everything you've said, I told her. Not quite a lie. I had thought about it extensively for the several seconds it took her to finish the sentence, before deciding my answer would stay exactly what it had always been. I hung up and sat with it a long while. Loretta used to say a scared person asks you for a small thing first, to see if you'll give it, before admitting how large the real need actually is. She was right about that too. Priscilla hadn't called to warn me. She'd called to test whether there was still a softer path to the same house. One that didn't require Dean or Foster or anyone else to ever know how deep the hole really went. I called Weldon Trask that afternoon and told him about the call. He wasn't surprised. That confirmed something for me, he said. She's out of options through legitimate channels. No bank in 3 counties would extend her further credit against a property she doesn't hold title to, which she may not fully understand yet, or may understand perfectly and is hoping you don't. Either way, Sunday needs to happen exactly as planned. Every document laid out in order. No half measures, no side conversations that leave room for her to reframe this later as some kind of misunderstanding. I don't want to destroy her, I told him, and I meant it. I want this stopped. Those aren't the same thing, Weldon. I need you to understand the difference. After Sunday, my son still has to live his life. My granddaughter still has to grow up in whatever's left of this family. Weldon was quiet a moment. Then let the documents do the stopping, he said. Let your own restraint do the rest. That combination does more damage to people like this than rage ever could, and far less damage to the people left standing afterward. Rage burns everything down indiscriminately. The truth, laid out calmly, only burns what was never built to stand in the first place. I thought about that the rest of the week. Working the yard, checking walls for level. Watching Ray watch me with the particular concern of a man who's noticed his friend carrying something heavy and hasn't been told what it is. I didn't tell Ray the date of the dinner, didn't tell anyone but Foster and Weldon. Some things need to stay quiet until the moment they're meant to be loud. The way you don't announce a demolition to the whole street until the charges are set and the countdown's already running. Friday evening, 2 days before the dinner, Dean called me alone, without Priscilla. That itself told me something had shifted in that house I didn't yet fully understand. Dad, he said, something's wrong with Priscilla. She's been different all week. Quiet. Scared almost. She keeps saying Sunday's going to be important, but she won't tell me why. I chose my words carefully. Sunday's going to be an honest conversation, I said. That's all I can tell you right now, son, but I need you to come with an open mind. Remember something before you sit down at that table. Whatever gets said Sunday, it's not aimed at breaking this family. It's aimed at fixing something that's been broken quietly for a while now, without anyone saying its name out loud. Is this about the house? Dean asked. It's about the truth, I said. The house is just where the truth happens to live. He was quiet on the line a long moment. I'm scared, Dad, he said finally. It was the most honest thing my son had said to me since our conversation at the yard weeks earlier. I don't know what I'm walking into. Sunday. You're walking into your own kitchen table, I told him. The one your mother set every night for 30 years. Nothing in that room's going to hurt you, Dean. Unless you've been building your whole life on something that was never really solid to begin with. And if that's true, better to find out now, while there's still time to build it right. He didn't answer that directly, just said he'd see me Sunday, and hung up. I sat in my kitchen a long while after that call, looking at the level on the counter, thinking about how strange it was that the calmest tool I owned had somehow become the loudest thing in this entire house. Saturday, the day before, I drove out to the cemetery on the hill above town, where Loretta's buried next to a maple tree she used to say she wanted for shade, though neither of us ever thought it'd be tall enough to actually cast any by the time either of us needed it. It's tall now. I sat on the bench near her stone a good while, saying nothing out loud, Just sitting the way you sit with someone you've run out of new things to say to, but still want close by. I told her, finally, that I was doing what she asked, building the wall, standing in it. I told her Ren was going to be all right, whatever happened tomorrow, because two women who never met each other had somehow raised her between them, one from a kitchen table and one from a folded letter in a recipe box. I drove home as the light was going gold over the quarry, and I laid out my 5 pieces of paper on the counter one final time, checking each one against the others the way you'd check a set of blueprints before pouring a foundation you only get to pour once. Dean and Priscilla arrived a little after 4 that Sunday. Ren trailed behind them with a book under her arm, the way she does when family dinners run long. Foster Higby arrived 10 minutes later, in a clean shirt instead of his bank clothes, carrying a slim leather folder. I recognised it from 19 years of watching him carry it into every serious conversation we'd ever had. Priscilla noticed the folder right away. Her eyes flicked to it, then to me, then back to her plate. The way a person's eyes move when they're deciding whether to be worried yet. "Foster," she said too brightly. "I didn't realise this was a business dinner." "It's just a dinner, Priscilla," Foster said, setting the folder beside his plate without ceremony. "Gerald asked me to bring some paperwork along, in case it came up. That's all. We ate for a while like any Sunday. Pot roast, the same recipe Priscilla had made before. This time I'd cooked it myself in Loretta's pans the way I used to." Ren picked at her plate and watched the adults quiet and sharp. Dean tried small talk, a fence line job his crew had finished that week. I asked good questions, the kind a father asks a son whose work he's proud of. For a few minutes it almost felt like an ordinary family dinner, the kind we used to have before any of this started. Then Priscilla set her fork down, looked at me with that particular brightness she gets when she's steering a conversation exactly where she wants it. "Gerald," she said, "since we're all here and since Foster's here too, I think it's a good time to talk about the future. About the house." "Go ahead," I said. "I spoke with the community outside Redcliffe again," she said. "They can hold the opening until the end of the month, not much longer. I really think for everyone's sake we should move forward with listing the house. Dean and I discussed it. We think it's the responsible thing to do, given your age. And given everything going on. Given your age, given everything going on." The same 2 phrases, worn smooth from repetition, like a stone you've turned over so many times it no longer has any edges left to catch on. "What exactly is going on?" I asked, mild as could be. "I'd like to hear you say it plain, Priscilla. What exactly do you think is going on with me?" She hesitated, just slightly. Dean's eyes went to his plate, the way a man's eyes go to his plate when he already knows the next sentence is going to be a lie. "We just worry," Priscilla said. "Memory. Confusion sometimes. Small things. Nothing dramatic, Gerald, just normal things for a man your age. Confused." I said the word alone first, then dismantled it, as if the 46 years I spent building foundations under half this county left me unable to read my own bank statement. Nobody said anything for a moment. Ren looked up from her plate, watching me now with real attention. "I'd like to address that concern directly," I said, "since you've raised it in front of witnesses. Foster, would you mind sharing what you brought?" Foster opened his folder without a word, slid the first document across the table toward Priscilla and Dean. The trust paperwork, dated 3 years back, my signature and Foster's beside it, the county recorder's stamp in the corner. "This is a trust naming Ren Corbett as sole beneficiary of the Sycamore Ridge property," Foster said, plain and clear. "Recorded 3 years ago. The bank holds the note as trustee. No sale, transfer, or listing of this property can occur without the trustee's authorization. That requires both Gerald's consent while he's living and mine as bank officer. Nobody else's name appears anywhere on this document. Not Dean's, not Priscilla's." Priscilla's face went through several things fast. Confusion first, the honest kind. Then something colder as the meaning settled in. "That's not possible," she said. "This house has always been discussed as part of the family estate. Dean's inheritance." "Dean will inherit plenty," I said. "Just not this house. Not directly. And not in a form anyone married into this family can put a price tag on and sell out from under a 12-year-old girl who never asked for any of this fight." Foster slid the second document across. The holding company paperwork for the Furnace Street property, dated the same period, structured the same way. "The company land is held identically," Foster said. I understand a broker named Dennis Whitcomb was recently contacted about a potential sale of that property. I want to be clear, for the record, no such sale was ever possible. That property answers to a holding entity Gerald controls alone. The room went very quiet. Dean looked at Priscilla now, and this time his eyes didn't move away. "You tried to sell the yard?" he asked her, quiet, disbelieving. "The company. Dad's company." "I was exploring options," Priscilla said, her voice climbing slightly. The first real crack I'd heard in it since this whole thing started. "For all of us, Dean, including you. I was trying to fix something before it broke completely." "Fix what, exactly?" I asked, "since we're being honest tonight. Why don't you tell your husband, in front of his father, what needed fixing so badly you'd try selling land that was never yours to sell?" Foster slid the third document across before Priscilla could answer. "This is a notice from First Redcliffe Commercial Bank," Foster said, regarding a business loan currently $18,000 in arrears, scheduled for a formal review with possible full acceleration if the account isn't brought current within the stated window. Dean's face when he read that document is something I don't think I'll forget. Not anger, not right away. Just a kind of collapsing disbelief. The look of a man realizing the floor he's been standing on has been rotted through for months, while he walked across it every single day without noticing. $18,000, he said. Quiet. "Priscilla, you told me the business was fine. You told me last month everything was fine." "I didn't want to worry you," Priscilla said. Her voice had lost all its brightness now, gone thin and small, in a way I hadn't heard from her once in 8 years of family dinners. "You didn't want to worry me," Dean repeated, "so instead you tried to sell my father's house, and his company, behind both our backs, while telling me everything was fine." "I was trying to save us," Priscilla said. For the first time that evening, I believed she meant it, even if I couldn't forgive the shape her saving had taken. "I was scared, Dean. I've been scared for months, and I didn't know how else to fix it. Your father's house was just sitting there. I thought if we could just sell it, just this once, everything else would work itself out." I let that sit in the room a long moment before I spoke again. Wren was watching her mother now, an expression on her young face I hadn't seen before. Something between confusion and a dawning, painful clarity. "Priscilla," I said, quiet, no heat in it at all. "I want you to hear something. And I want you to hear it the way it's meant, not the way fear's going to twist it later tonight when you are alone with it. I don't hate you. I never have. I think you're a frightened woman who made some very bad choices trying to outrun that fear. I think somewhere underneath all of it, you love my son, and you love that little girl sitting right there watching all of this happen. But you don't get my house. You don't get my company. And you don't get to call me confused in my own home, because it was easier than telling your husband the truth about $18,000. I slid the fourth document across the table. Dr. Bellinger's evaluation. Dated, filed, unimpeachable. In case anyone still wanted to pursue that particular argument, I said, "Here's an independent physician's opinion, filed with my attorney before this conversation ever happened, stating plainly my cognition and judgment are sound, sharper." Her words, than most men 20 years younger. Nobody reached for that document. Nobody needed to. The room had already understood everything it needed to understand. Adding more paper to it now would have been like adding another coat of paint to a wall everybody already knew wasn't level. Priscilla put her face in her hands. Dean sat very still beside her, staring at the tablecloth. The pale grey one with the thin gold stripe. The one she'd brought from her own house. The same one she'd used to dress up a dinner meant to sell me on my own disappearance. I reached into my shirt pocket then, took out the last piece of paper I'd brought to that table. Loretta's letter, folded soft along its worn crease from all the times I'd unfolded and refolded it over the past weeks. "There's one more thing," I said. "From your mother, Dean, written 2 years before she died. I want to read part of it out loud because I think everyone at this table needs to hear it in her own words, not mine." I read the line about the folding table, about the wall around the trust she'd asked me to build, before either of us knew we'd need it. Then I read the last line, the one that mattered most, slow so it would land the way she'd meant it to. "Don't let this house go to whoever measures the windows first," I read. "Let it go to whoever's still standing in it when the dust settles." The kitchen was silent except for the refrigerator humming, same as it's hummed for 15 years. Wren was crying quietly. Not from fear, I understood watching her, but from something closer to relief. The particular relief of a child who's spent weeks sensing a storm without anyone naming its true shape. Finally hearing the whole thing said out loud, in a room full of grown-ups. "The dust has settled," I said, folding the letter back along its crease. "And I'm still standing in it. That's really all this was ever going to come down to." Nobody moved for what felt like a long time after that, probably only a minute or two by the kitchen clock. Foster closed his folder quietly and set his hands flat on the table. The posture of a man who's finished his part of a job, waiting to see what the rest of the crew does next. Priscilla finally lifted her face from her hands. Her eyes were red, but her voice, when it came, was steadier than I expected. "What happens now?" she asked, not defiant. Not scheming, just a woman who'd run out of moves and wanted to know the shape of what came next. "That depends on you," I said. "The house isn't yours to lose because it was never yours to have. That part's settled. Not up for further discussion tonight or any other night. What happens to your business and your marriage? And this family going forward, that's a different question. It's not mine alone to answer." Dean spoke up then, voice rough. $18,000, he said again, like the number itself had become something he needed to keep turning over to believe it. "Priscilla, why didn't you just tell me? I make decent money. We could have figured out a payment plan. Talked to a bank, a real one, instead of trying to sell my father's land behind his back." "Because I was ashamed," Priscilla said. Here, finally, the practiced brightness gave way to something that sounded almost like the truth. "I built that business from nothing, Dean, same as your father built his. I couldn't stand admitting I'd let it fail. So I looked for another way, and the other way was wrong. I know that now. Some part of me knew it the whole time and just didn't want to look at it straight on. I watched Wren during all of this. A man learns at my age to watch the quiet ones in a room as closely as the loud ones." She'd stopped crying, watching her mother with an expression that wasn't quite forgiveness yet, but wasn't condemnation either. Something more like a child recalibrating, in real time, how much weight she could still put on a person she loved. "Grandpa," Wren said quiet, into the silence, "is Mom going to be okay?" "That's up to your mother," I said, "and up to what she does starting tomorrow morning. I can't fix $18,000 for her, sweetheart. And I won't, because bailing someone out of a hole they dug through their own choices doesn't teach them how to stop digging. But I can tell you this house is safe. Your future is safe. Nobody in this room's going to lose their home tonight. Whatever else gets sorted out." Foster cleared his throat gently. "For what it's worth," he said, addressing Priscilla directly for the first time that evening. "The bank handling your business loan isn't mine. But I know the loan officer there. If you're willing to sit down honestly, with real numbers, there are often more options than people realise once panic stops driving the conversation. I'd be glad to make an introduction if you want one." It was, I thought, a very Foster thing to do, offering a rope to a woman who'd just spent 3 months trying to take his oldest client's house out from under him. But that's the kind of man Foster Higby is. Part of why I trusted him with 19 years of my accounts in the first place. Priscilla looked at him a long moment, then at Dean, then finally at me. "I'm sorry, Gerald," she said. "Not because I got caught. I know that's what it probably looks like. But because I let fear turn me into someone who'd do that to a man who never once treated me as anything less than family, even when I clearly didn't deserve it. I didn't answer that right away. I want to be honest about that too. Forgiveness isn't a switch a man flips because the room's gone quiet and everyone's waiting for the warm ending. I told her I heard her, told her actions over the coming months would tell me more than any one sentence said at a table where she'd just been caught. That was as far as I'd go that night. Watching her face, I think she understood that was fair. Maybe even more than she'd expected. Dean walked me to the door later after Priscilla had gone quiet, and Wren fell asleep on the couch, book still open on her chest. He stood on the porch a minute, hands in his pockets, looking like a much younger man than the one who'd walked in 4 hours earlier. "I should have seen it, Dad," he said. "The signs were there, I just didn't want to look." "Most people don't," I said. "Looking costs something. Not looking feels free, right up until the day it isn't." "What do I do now?" he asked. "You start with one no," I told him. Same as I told him weeks before at the yard. Same as I told you already. You just finally have a reason big enough to make the first one stick. He nodded and hugged me. something he hasn't done since he was maybe 12 years old. I drove home that night with the level still riding on the passenger seat, Loretta's letter back in my shirt pocket. A feeling in my chest I hadn't had in longer than I could easily remember. Not triumph, something quieter than that. The feeling of a wall you built years ago, finally tested by real weather, and holding exactly the way you built it to hold. The weeks after that Sunday dinner moved slower than the ones before it. Recovery always moves slower than crisis. Crisis has its own momentum. Recovery has to be built, one deliberate choice at a time, same as anything else worth having. The first real consequence landed about 10 days later. The county recorder's office, following a routine audit triggered by Weldon Trask filing formal notice of the trust's terms, flagged Priscilla's business accounts for review by the state's Consumer Protection Division. It wasn't punitive exactly. Not in the way people picture when they hear the word investigation. It was procedural. The plain machinery of institutions doing what they're built to do, once a pattern of misrepresenting property ownership, gets formally documented in writing. The review froze $14,000 in her business accounts pending clarification. Money she couldn't touch for 6 weeks while auditors confirmed she'd never had legal standing to offer either property as collateral or for sale to begin with. Priscilla called me the day the freeze notice arrived, her voice tight with a fear I recognise now as different from the calculating fear she'd carried all spring. This fear was smaller, more honest, the fear of a person facing real consequences for real choices, rather than the fear of a person still hoping to outrun them. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she said. I know, I told her, but it went this far because you let it. One small decision at a time. Same as any wall goes crooked. Nobody sets out to build a crooked wall. They just stop checking the level somewhere along the way. By the time they notice, it's already leaning too far to fix without tearing something down. She asked if I'd speak to anyone on her behalf, vouch for her somehow with the review. I told her I wouldn't. This wasn't cruelty. It was the same principle Loretta taught me about Dean's own roof repair years earlier. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a person circling their own hole is let them find their own way out of it. So the next time they're tempted to dig, they remember how hard the climbing was. Foster's introduction to the loan officer at her bank did happen, though, about a week after the dinner. I'd asked him to follow through regardless because a promise made at a table, even by accident, in front of witnesses, is still a promise. I don't believe in letting good offers die just because the person who deserved a consequence also deserved one honest hand extended toward fixing it. Priscilla worked out a restructured payment plan on her original loan, extending the term, lowering the monthly obligation to something her business could actually carry if she ran it honestly without panic driving every decision. It wasn't a rescue, it was a ladder. The kind you still have to climb yourself, one rung at a time with your own 2 hands doing the work. She closed the Redcliffe showroom within the month. The lease was already ending on its own, regardless of anything I'd done. She reopened 3 months later in a smaller space above a bakery on Depot Street. Half the square footage, half the overhead. And, from what Dean told me later, roughly the same number of clients. Most of her business had never depended on the fancy storefront to begin with. That's a lesson a lot of people learn too late. Or never learn at all. The overhead was never the thing making her good at her work. It was just the thing that made her feel for a while like she'd already arrived somewhere she hadn't actually arrived yet. Dean changed more slowly, the way I expected. 8 years of letting someone else carry the weight of every decision doesn't unlearn itself in a single Sunday dinner, however dramatic that dinner turns out to be. But I noticed things. Small things. The kind a father notices in a son he's watched his whole life. He started coming by the yard more, on his own, without Priscilla. Sitting with Ray and me at lunch on the overturned buckets. Asking real questions about the business instead of just signing whatever paperwork crossed his desk. He started saying no to Priscilla in small ways first, same as I'd told him to. A vacation they couldn't afford. A car he thought was unnecessary. Each small no seemed to make the next one a little easier, the way I'd promised him it would. About 6 weeks after the dinner, Dean came by the house on a Saturday, alone, and asked if he could see Loretta's ledgers. I gave them to him without hesitation. He sat at the black walnut table nearly 3 hours, reading his mother's handwriting. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red in a way I hadn't seen since her funeral. She saw all of it coming, he said. Years before any of us did. She usually did, I said. She was better at reading people than either of us ever gave her credit for, while she was alive to hear us say it. I wish I'd listened to her more, Dean said. About Priscilla. About everything. You're listening now, I told him. That's not nothing, son. Most people never get around to it at all. He asked quietly if he could take one of the ledgers home. I told him he could take all of them. They were never really mine to keep from him. They were his mother's love letter to this whole family, written 30 years at a time, one careful entry after another. A son should get to hold that in his own hands eventually. Wren, for her part, came through the whole ordeal steadier than either adult around her, the way children sometimes do when the truth finally gets named out loud instead of festering, unspoken in the corners of a house. She started riding her bike to the yard even more that summer. I taught her, slowly, patiently, the same way my own father taught me, how to check a wall for level, how to feel for the truth in a piece of stone with nothing but your own 2 hands and a little patience. Grandpa, she asked me one afternoon, sitting on her usual overturned bucket, watching me tap a stone into place, is Mum going to be okay for real? Not just okay because you fixed it, okay because she fixed herself. Exactly the right question from a 12-year-old raised by 2 generations of people who valued the truth over comfort. I gave her the most honest answer I had. I don't know yet, I told her. That part's still being built. But I'll tell you this, your mother's been showing up to work every day at that new little shop of hers, doing good, honest work, paying down what she owes, $1 at a time. The slow way, the only way that actually holds. That's a different woman than the one who tried to sell a house that never belonged to her. Whether she keeps being that woman, that's up to her. Same as it's up to all of us, every day, to keep being whoever we decided to be the last time things got hard. She thought about that a long moment, turning it over like she was checking it for level herself. That's kind of like what you do with walls, she said finally. You don't just build them once, you have to keep checking them. That's exactly it, I told her. I felt something in my chest I can only describe as the particular pride of watching a lesson land somewhere it's going to stay planted for the rest of a person's life. I want to tell you about one more thing before I close this out. It matters more to me than almost anything else in this story. It's the part I think about most some nights, lying awake in that same bedroom, restored now, repainted back to something close to Loretta's original blue, the colour I matched from a sliver of paint chip still clinging to the closet door frame after the movers stripped everything else clean. Priscilla asked to see me alone, about 2 months after the dinner. Drove out to the house on a weekday evening while Dean stayed home with Wren. She stood on my porch a long moment before I invited her in, looking like a woman who'd rehearsed what she wanted to say several times and still wasn't sure it would come out right. I brought something, she said, and handed me a small box. Inside it was a photograph I'd never seen before, an old one of Loretta at maybe 25, standing in front of a half-built stone wall, laughing at whoever was holding the camera, mortar dust on her hands. I found it going through some old boxes at your late wife's old church group files, Priscilla said, stumbling slightly over how to refer to Loretta. The church secretary was cleaning out an archive, didn't know who to give it to. I thought it should come to you, not from me trying to fix anything, just because it's yours and it's beautiful, and I didn't think it was right for it to sit in a box in someone's basement. I looked at that photograph a long time, Loretta at 25, younger than I'd ever really pictured her, laughing in front of a wall I didn't recognise, but that had clearly once mattered enough to someone to photograph. I thanked Priscilla and meant it plainly, without complication. The way you thank someone for a genuinely kind act, even when the history between you is still being rebuilt, one careful stone at a time. I'm not asking for anything, Priscilla said before I could say more. I know I have a long way to go before anything between us feels normal again. I just wanted you to have this. Thank you, I said again. Sometimes that's the whole of what a moment needs, and nothing more. This means something to me, Priscilla. More than you probably know. She nodded and left without staying for coffee, without pushing for reconciliation faster than either of us was ready to build it. I stood on that porch a long while after her car pulled away, holding a photograph of my wife laughing in front of a wall. Neither of us had ever mentioned to me in 39 years of marriage, wondering what other pieces of her I still hadn't found yet. Grateful in a way I hadn't expected to feel toward Priscilla of all people, for the one she'd just handed back. Autumn came to Larkspur Hollow the way it always does, slow at first, then all at once. The maples along Sycamore Ridge Road turning the colour of the brick I've laid my whole life. I want to tell you where everyone landed, because a story like this doesn't really end at a dinner table, no matter how much that dinner table felt at the time. Like the whole world tipping back into balance. Corbett Masonry and Sons is still standing on its 2 acres on Furnace Street, still worth a little over $1 million, $100,000 by the last appraisal Foster ran for the Trust records. Though I'll tell you plainly, a number like that means less to me now than it did the day I bought this land with a coffee can full of cash and a stubborn streak. Dean runs it well these days. Better than he did a year ago. A man who's finally started saying no to the people around him tends to get better at saying yes to the right things too. He's brought on 2 new crews this year, taken on the hospital renovation contract we've been chasing for a decade. Last month he called me, unprompted, just to walk through a bid before he submitted it, the way he used to when he was still learning the trade at my elbow. I settled a few last accounts that fall too, small things, the kind that don't make for dramatic reading, but matter to a man who likes his books closed clean. I paid off Wren's college fund contribution early, $31,000 total, sitting untouched in an account she won't see a penny of until she's 18, same as her father's own fund had waited for him. I quietly forgave the $2,800 Dean had borrowed from Loretta all those years back for that roof repair. Not because he asked me to, he never did. A debt paid in secret to protect a father's feelings isn't really a debt at all. It's a kindness, and you don't collect interest on kindness. And I finally had the mortgage note itself, the original $209,000 I'd paid off 9 years earlier, formally retired from every last piece of paperwork still floating around the county records, just so nobody, ever again, could point to an old filing and pretend there was any ambiguity left about whose name belonged on that house. The house on Sycamore Ridge Road is still mine, still held in trust for Wren, still valued at $460,000. And still, most importantly, exactly the house I built for Loretta, room by room, brick by brick, over 3 summers of headlight work, and a marriage that outlasted every storm anyone tried to send through it. The bedroom is painted blue again, not exactly Loretta's original shade. Paint fades and changes over 40 years even under 2 coats of somebody else's hurry, but close enough that when the morning light comes through that window, I still catch myself thinking, for half a second, that she's just stepped into the next room. Priscilla's design business, the smaller one above the bakery on Depot Street, cleared $11,000 in profits last quarter, the first profitable quarter she's had in over 2 years, according to Dean. And I believe him because Dean doesn't inflate numbers the way his wife once did, when she was scared of what the real ones might say about her. She's current on her restructured loan. She's turned down at least 2 clients who wanted her to stage properties in ways she called dishonest. Her word. A small thing, maybe, but the kind of small thing that tells you a person's actually rebuilding something true underneath the surface, rather than just repainting the same crooked wall a fresh colour and hoping nobody checks it with a level. I won't tell you Priscilla and I are close now. That would be a lie, and I've told enough small, useful ones in this story already without adding a big, unnecessary one at the end. What I will tell you is that she comes to Sunday dinner now, with something I didn't see in her, those first 8 years of marriage to my son. A kind of humility that doesn't perform itself for an audience, that just sits quiet at the table and does the dishes afterward without being asked, the way Loretta used to. Though I doubt Priscilla would ever compare herself to my late wife out loud, and I've never once suggested she should try. Dean asked me, a few months back, sitting on the porch one evening with 2 beers between us, whether I'd ever really forgiven Priscilla for what she tried to do. I thought about that a long while before I answered him. Forgiveness isn't one thing that happens once, I told him. It's more like checking a wall. You don't check it one time and trust it forever. You check it again every season, every time the weather changes, every time you've got reason to wonder if something shifted underneath while you weren't looking. Right now, today, I forgive her plenty. Tomorrow I'll check again. That's not distrust, son. That's just how you keep something standing that's worth keeping standing at all. He nodded slowly, the way he does now when he's actually turning something over, instead of waiting for his turn to talk. Another change I've noticed in him this year that makes me prouder than almost anything else that's happened since that dinner. Wren turned 13 this fall. I bought her her own level for her birthday. A good one, a proper 4-foot aluminum level, not a toy. She carries it in her backpack most days after school, uses it on anything that holds still long enough. Door frames, fence posts, the edge of her own desk at home. She told me, unprompted, that she wants to learn the whole trade someday. Not just the masonry, all of it. The bidding, the books, the way you read a client's face to know if they're going to pay on time or need chasing. I told her that's a fine ambition for a 13-year-old, a finer one than most grown men ever manage to hold on to past their 20s. I still keep Loretta's ledgers, all 6 of them, in that same recipe box, though I moved the box out of the hall closet and back onto the kitchen counter, next to the level where it belongs, where anyone in this family can open it and read her handwriting whenever they need, reminding of who actually built the foundation. This whole family still stands on. I read a page most evenings, still the way some men read scripture. Not because I need convincing of anything, because her voice on those pages is the closest I can still get to the sound of her actually being in the room with me. I want to tell you about the last thing that happened before I close this story out. I think it says more about where we all ended up than any number I could give you. It was a Sunday in late October, cool enough for jackets. The whole family came out to the yard. Dean and Priscilla and Wren, Ray Talbot and his wife. Even Foster Higby, who I'd started inviting to more than just business meetings, once I realised the man had become something closer to family than client over 19 years of trusting him with everything I owned. We were finishing a job together, not a paid one. Just a favour for an elderly widow 2 streets over, whose porch steps had finally given out after 40 years of Pennsylvania winters. I'd asked Dean if he wanted to bring the whole crew out on a Saturday to fix it for free. The kind of job Loretta always said mattered more than any invoice ever could. Wren mixed her first batch of mortar that day, under my direction, getting the water ratio wrong twice before she got it right the 3rd time. The same way I got it wrong more times than I can count, when my own father was teaching me on a job site outside this same town 50 years earlier. Dean laid the first course of new brick steps himself, checking his own level without needing me to remind him, the way a man does once the habit's finally settled into his hands, instead of just his head. Priscilla brought sandwiches out around noon, the same way Ray's mother used to for Dean and me all those years ago. She sat on an overturned bucket next to Wren for a while, watching her daughter work, asking real questions about the mortar mix instead of pretending to already know the answers. I stood back from all of it for a minute, the way I used to stand back from every wall I ever built, checking the whole picture rather than any single stone. I thought about Loretta and the letter still folded soft in my shirt pocket, even now, months after that Sunday dinner, because some things a man just keeps close whether he needs to or not. I never threw a punch in this whole business, never raised my voice past a level tone at any single person who wronged me. The only weapons I ever used were patience and a level, and the plain truth laid out on a table where everybody could finally see it in the same light at the same time. I built a company out of nothing but a hod and a trowel and a stubborn streak. Near the end of my life, when people who married into my family tried to convince me and everyone else that I'd gone soft in the head and lost my grip on what was mine, I found out my grip had never actually loosened at all. If anything, 46 years of checking walls for level had taught me exactly how to spot the lean in a person, long before it ever showed up in a bank statement or a moving truck parked outside my own front door. The old widow whose steps we fixed that day came out to thank us as we were packing up the truck, tears in her eyes over something as small as a set of brick steps. She told Wren, unprompted, that she hoped she grew up just like her grandfather. Wren looked over at me with a grin I recognised instantly. I've seen that exact grin in an old photograph of Loretta, laughing in front of a half-built wall, mortar dust on her hands, taken decades before either of us knew how much of ourselves we'd eventually hand down to a granddaughter neither of us could have imagined yet. That evening, driving home in the truck with my level riding on the passenger seat same as always, I thought about the guest room cot they'd given me all those months ago, meant as a small cruelty. A way of saying, without saying it, that I no longer mattered enough to keep my own bedroom. I thought about how that cot, in the end, had never once managed to move me an inch from anything that actually belonged to me. Not my house, not my company, not my dignity, and not my late wife's memory, which they'd tried to paint over in 2 coats of hurry, and found underneath it all was still bleeding through exactly where it always had been. The dust settled, same as Loretta always said it would. When it did, I was still standing right where I'd always stood, in a house built one course of brick and stone at a time, by a man who never needed to raise his voice to prove what was already true. Because the truth, laid out plain on a kitchen table, has never once in my whole life needed any help from anger to do its work. I checked the level one more time before I went inside that night. Out of old habit, nothing more. It read true, the way it always does when you've built something meant to last. Somewhere behind me in the kitchen, I could hear Wren asking her father a question about mortar ratios, Priscilla laughing at something Ray's wife had said. Dean's voice, steadier now than I'd heard it in years, answering his daughter's question, the careful way his own mother once answered mine, at a folding table outside a church a lifetime ago. Back before any of us knew exactly how far a level could carry a family, so long as somebody in the house was willing to keep checking it.